The Galactic Council had convened under unusual circumstances. A thick tension hung in the air of the massive chamber, its transparent walls reflecting the distant stars, and the outlines of various delegates gathered from across the galaxy. These leaders represented over 100 civilizations, some as old as the universe itself, and others barely emerging from their homeworlds. Council leader Arvanix, a tall and silver-skinned Varicane, raised his hand to calm the murmuring crowd. "Delegates, we are assembled to address an unprecedented event in our history," he announced, his deep voice reverberating through the vast hall. "The sudden reemergence of a colony we believed lost for over a millennium. A hidden human colony, undetected until now." The announcement sent a ripple of shock through the council. Humanity was known for its ambition and courage, traits that had propelled them into the stars centuries ago. But their home planet, Earth, had joined the Galactic Council centuries past as a small, respectable, and somewhat unassuming member. They had only a single inhabited solar system, the rest of their colonies reportedly lost or destroyed in the chaos of the early expansion wars. But now, humanity's history seemed far more complicated. A single, undetected signal, encrypted in a way only known to humans, had reached Council headquarters 2 weeks prior, revealing the existence of a previously unknown human civilization. Arvanix continued, his calm but urgent voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have received a message from this colony, and they call themselves the Solari Dominion. They have requested an audience with the Council to discuss matters of shared interest." The murmurs grew louder as a massive hollow image lit up above Arvanix, displaying a message from the Solari Dominion, sent to the Council in pristine and formal language. It was a declaration, polite yet firm, requesting a diplomatic summit to discuss the colony's return to galactic affairs. Arvanix raised a hand to quiet the voices. "The Solari Dominion's delegation is expected to arrive within the hour. Prepare yourselves, delegates. The humans we knew may not be the humans we meet today." A colossal ship entered the Council's orbit, dwarfing most of the fleet stationed in the surrounding sectors. Its design was both familiar and alien, resembling human engineering, but with intricate details of technology that far surpassed anything the Council knew humans to possess. Inside the Council chamber, the delegates stared in awe and unease at the massive craft on their display screens. Moments later, a transporter activated in the center of the hall, and the Solari delegation materialized. The delegation was led by a tall, imposing figure wearing a long, dark robe adorned with symbols that none of the Council members recognized. His hair was streaked with silver, and his piercing gaze surveyed the chamber with the calm confidence of a man who had seen far more than his share of battles. He introduced himself as Lord Eric Solon, the High Commander of the Solari Dominion. With a dignified bow, he addressed the assembly. "Honorable leaders of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice resonant. "I am Lord Eric Solon, and I represent the Solari Dominion, a sovereign human civilization that has endured in isolation for over 1,000 years. He paused, letting his words sink in. "We are here to reintroduce ourselves to the galaxy, and to remind the Council that humanity's legacy extends beyond the single world of Earth." The Council members exchanged wary glances, and one of the delegates, a reptilian Yarick named Crixer, spoke up. "But humanity has already joined our Council through Earth. Are you claiming that your colony is separate from Earth?" A faint smile played on Eric's lips. "We are indeed separate, Crixer of the Yarick. While Earth represents the humans of the inner systems, the Solari Dominion represents those of the outer frontier, the ones who survived wars, endured isolation, and thrived in the harshest of conditions. We have evolved into something different." At the Council's urging, Eric explained the origins of the Solari Dominion. Over 1,000 years ago, during humanity's initial wave of interstellar colonization, a fleet of explorers ventured beyond known space, seeking new frontiers. But an unforeseen catastrophe, a cosmic storm of unprecedented scale, had struck, severing all communication with Earth. The Solari, as they began to call themselves, were forced to adapt to their hostile new environment on the edge of a supernova system. With limited resources and no hope of rescue, they developed advanced technologies to survive, eventually creating massive, self-sustaining habitats that evolved into sprawling space cities. As the centuries passed, the Solari built a formidable civilization. Without the luxury of easy resources, they had learned to harness energy from the very stars themselves and perfected technologies that even the Council had only dreamed of. But isolation had shaped their culture in ways that differed starkly from Earth's. They became fiercely independent, and their society was built on principles of survival, strength, and self-reliance. Their leaders, chosen for their strategic minds and resilience, forged a society that was both powerful and proud. Lord Eric's gaze swept over the assembly as he recounted this history. "We have forged our destiny in the darkness of the void, where no one else could. The Solari Dominion is here not to seek council approval, but to establish a respectful partnership with this galaxy." The confidence in his words left a profound silence in the chamber, until finally, Council Leader Arvinix spoke, his voice measured. "You possess advanced technologies, far beyond what humanity on Earth has developed. Why reveal yourselves now, after all these centuries?" Eric's expression darkened. "Because the galaxy is changing. We have observed growing threats from factions that seek to conquer, destroy, and subjugate. Our isolation may have kept us safe, but it also kept us in the dark. Now we seek knowledge, allies, and information, and to bring our strength to bear against those who would bring ruin to the galaxy." A murmur spread through the council chamber. Several delegates nodded, understanding the wisdom of his words, though others remained cautious, suspicious of this powerful civilization that had revealed itself so abruptly. As the meeting proceeded, Lord Eric made it clear that while the Solari Dominion respected the Council's authority, they would not be subordinate to it. He offered technological and military assistance to the Council, proposing a mutual defense agreement to counter rising threats in the galaxy. But his offer came with a warning. "There are forces lurking in the outer reaches," Eric explained. "Powers we have encountered that lie beyond even the Dominion's reach, entities that feast on entire star systems, that seek to unravel the fabric of reality itself. We have seen them, and we believe they may be on the move once more." The council fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them like a shadow. Arvinix, ever the diplomat, leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that an ancient danger is rising again?" Eric's face was grave. "Yes, and we are not alone in recognizing it. There are other hidden civilizations, ancient, concealed, and waiting for the right moment to emerge. The Solari Dominion is only the first to reveal itself, but there are others, and their intentions may not be as noble." His words sent a shiver through the assembly. The galaxy was already a tumultuous place, with countless factions vying for control, but the revelation of concealed empires and ancient enemies on the move was far more than anyone had expected. Eric continued, "The Solari Dominion is prepared to share our knowledge and technology, but only if the Council is willing to acknowledge our autonomy. We have thrived in isolation, and while we are open to alliances, we will not submit to oversight." A silence followed his declaration, as the council weighed the implications. This wasn't merely a rejoining, it was a potential realignment of power. The meeting eventually adjourned, but the questions it raised lingered. As Lord Eric and his delegation departed, they left the council divided, some eager to welcome the Dominion's strength, while others feared the emergence of a new power that could disrupt the galactic order. Meanwhile, in the depths of space, whispers of the Solari Dominion's return began to spread. Unknown to most, Eric's arrival had been noticed by the ancient beings he had hinted at, beings who had watched humanity's struggles from afar, and who now saw the Solari as a threat to their own mysterious plans. As Lord Eric and his delegation returned to their ship, a transmission reached him, encrypted with a code known only to the highest ranks of the Solari Dominion. It was a warning, an alert from the Dominion's distant outposts of strange movements in deep space, formations of unknown ships gathering at the edges of the galaxy. Eric's eyes hardened as he read the message. "It's beginning," he murmured. Turning to his lieutenant, he said, "Prepare the Dominion fleet. Inform the Council if they choose to stand with us or remain in their ignorance. One way or another, we must be ready." The return of the Solari Dominion sparked a whirlwind of diplomatic tension across the Galactic Council. The Council was split into factions, each grappling with the unprecedented situation at hand. Some factions, led by Council leader Arvanix himself, saw an alliance with the Solari as a way to strengthen their defenses against the shadowy threats lurking in deep space. Others, like Crixor the Yerek, regarded the Solari with suspicion, fearing that humanity's hidden colony could be a destabilizing force in the delicate balance of galactic power. Meanwhile, Eric Solon, the High Commander of the Solari Dominion, had already returned to his ship, the Aegis of Sol, an imposing vessel that represented the strength and independence of the Solari people. As he paced the command deck, he monitored the Council's deliberations via an encrypted channel. The room was dim, lit only by the blue glow of tactical screens and the occasional flash of starlight from the observation window. "High Commander," his lieutenant, Cale Dorian, approached with a data pad in hand. "We've received intelligence from the outer perimeter. A fleet of unknown vessels has appeared near the Draco cluster. The patterns of their movements suggest reconnaissance rather than direct attack, but we're detecting unusual energy signatures. They match nothing we've encountered before." Eric's brow furrowed. The Draco cluster was a remote sector, located near the very fringe of the Dominion's controlled space. The presence of an unknown fleet this close to Solari borders, especially at a time when they were attempting to establish a foothold within the Galactic Council, could not be a mere coincidence. "Are there any indications of hostile intent?" Eric asked, his voice calm but edged with steel. "None that we can confirm, sir," Cale replied. "But our reconnaissance teams report that these vessels seem to be observing us, almost as if they're assessing our defenses." Eric narrowed his gaze. "Send the Aegis's scout squadrons to shadow them. We need to know who they are and what they're after." Cale gave a quick nod and began relaying orders to the crew. As the lieutenant moved away, Eric continued to study the data on the screen. In his years of command, he had seen countless threats, from pirate marauders to rogue warlords, yet there was something unsettlingly familiar about these new energy signatures. Back on the Galactic Council's capital world of Solera Prime, heated debates filled the chamber. Arvanix had called for an emergency session to determine the Council's official stance on the Solari Dominion. He knew they needed to act quickly. Eric's warning about potential threats from beyond the galaxy's known boundaries was not to be taken lightly. "I implore the Council to recognize the strategic advantage of aligning with the Solari Dominion," Arvanix said, addressing the assembly. "The threats they've warned us about could spell doom for every civilization represented here. If we shun them, we risk facing these unknown dangers alone." Crixor, however, was not convinced. "The Solari Dominion reappears after a millennium in isolation, claiming to have knowledge of threats none of us have seen? And now they want us to submit to their military might. I urge the Council to be cautious." A new voice entered the discussion. Solera Intac, a representative of the Aquarian Collective, leaned forward. Her voice was calm but resolute. "We cannot ignore the possibility that the Dominion's intelligence is accurate. In the interest of security, we should be prepared to investigate these unknown threats and take precautions." As the Council debated, the chamber doors opened, and a figure entered, drawing immediate attention. It was an emissary from the Solari Dominion, a woman in Solari uniform, with sharp eyes and a bearing of unwavering confidence. She introduced herself as Captain Lyra Sarin, an envoy sent by Eric Solon to participate in the Council's discussions. "The High Commander sends his respects," she said, her voice clear and commanding, "and he wishes to extend a gesture of trust." The room fell silent as she opened a holographic display, projecting detailed schematics of Solari technology, specifically their advanced defense systems and starship weaponry. She raised her gaze to the Council, meeting each representative's eyes with the practiced ease of a diplomat. "This technology," she continued, "will be shared with the Council, contingent upon our mutual cooperation in dealing with the threat on the horizon. We do not ask for subjugation, as some here have implied. We seek partnership." The murmurs among the delegates shifted. The offer was tempting. Solari technology was centuries beyond the Council's own, and access to it could drastically alter their defensive capabilities. While the Council deliberated over the offer, Eric and his crew aboard the Aegis of Sol were receiving unsettling updates. The scout squadrons they had dispatched to the Draco cluster had gone dark. No communication, no signal. One moment, they were reporting in, and the next, silence. Eric clenched his jaw. The patterns emerging were too familiar to ignore. He had heard tales of these kinds of disappearances, stories passed down by his ancestors in the Dominion. They spoke of a dark force known only as the Celestial Shade, an ancient enemy that consumed entire star systems, leaving nothing behind. Kale approached, looking uneasy. "High Commander, another scout group has disappeared near the nebula of Droz. We're picking up faint, anomalous energy readings on the perimeter. They appear to be consistent with, well, the Shade." Eric nodded grimly. "The Shade?" He turned to Kale, his expression dark. "If they have returned, then the Council's fears are about to become a grim reality. This is not a fight we can win alone." Eric knew the Council needed to understand the magnitude of the threat, but convincing them would be another battle in itself. He activated the communication panel, opening a secure channel to Captain Sarin back on Solera Prime. "Captain Sarin, inform the Council that we have confirmed hostile activity near the Draco cluster. Our scout fleets have been compromised. Whatever remains of these beings is coming. Impress upon them that this is no ordinary adversary. The Solari Dominion's presence is the only chance the galaxy has against this threat." Captain Sarin relayed his message to the Council with the urgency it deserved. She could see the shock ripple through the chamber as she described the Celestial Shade and its rumored return. "We need a united front," she concluded. "This is not a human problem or a Solari problem. This is a galactic problem, and we must face it together." After hours of intense debate, the Council finally reached a decision. The Galactic Council would enter into a defensive alliance with the Solari Dominion, on the condition that the Dominion would honor the Council's sovereignty and share intelligence and resources openly. Arvanix nodded as the vote concluded, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Then it's settled. The Solari Dominion will join us as our allies against this shared threat." Captain Sarin relayed the decision to Eric, who received the news with a guarded nod. He knew the alliance was precarious, one born out of necessity rather than trust, but it was a start. Back on the Aegis of Sol, Eric watched as his fleet prepared to mobilize. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, the realization that he was now leading not just the Solari, but potentially the entire galaxy in a battle for survival. But as he gazed out into the vast, star-strewn darkness, he knew they were still only at the beginning. The Shade had returned, and it would take every ounce of Solari strength, every resource from the Council, and alliances once thought impossible to face this ancient force. And somewhere, beyond the edges of known space, the dark fleet of the Celestial Shade moved in silence, like shadows drifting through the cosmos, watching and waiting. The alliance between the Galactic Council and the Solari Dominion had barely been formalized when the first alarms rang across the sectors. Reports of attacks on remote planets poured in from scouts and trading vessels lucky enough to escape the onslaught. Entire colonies were found lifeless, stripped of energy and organic matter, leaving behind hollow shells of what had once been vibrant civilizations. On board the Aegis of Sol, Eric Solon stood at the center of the bridge, his expression as steely as ever. His gaze never wavered from the primary display showing a star map littered with red dots, each one marking a recent attack site. The Shade's presence was growing, and they were closing in fast. "Status update?" Eric asked, addressing Lieutenant Cale Dorian, who was sifting through data on his own console. Cale's face was grim. "We've confirmed 37 systems affected so far. We managed to evacuate a few planets in time, but most of the outer colonies were wiped out. The attacks seemed to be moving toward the core systems, towards Solari Prime." Eric's jaw clenched. He knew what this meant. The Shade wasn't simply attacking at random. They were honing in on something specific, perhaps even the Council itself. If the Shade could take out the Council's leadership, it would shatter any hope of a united defense. "Prepare the fleet for full mobilization," Eric ordered, his voice carrying a resolute edge. "The Council needs to see the Shade in action firsthand. We'll intercept them before they can reach Solari Prime." As Cale relayed the commands, Eric activated the secure comm link to the Council headquarters. He needed to get them to mobilize their forces, to make them understand that the situation was growing increasingly desperate. On Solari Prime, Council leader Arvanix sat at the head of an emergency meeting with representatives from every major species and faction. The room was thick with tension, the holographic display casting ominous red glows onto the worried faces of the delegates. "We've received confirmation from the Solari Dominion," Arvanix said, his voice barely containing his own fear. "The Shade's fleet has reached critical proximity to our core worlds. If they breach the Solarian sector, they'll have open access to the heart of the galaxy." Crixer, who had once been the Dominion's harshest critic, was now one of their staunchest allies in the Council. He rose from his seat, his reptilian scales catching the dim light. "The Solari Dominion warned us of this. Now we must mobilize. I propose that we merge our fleets with the Dominions and create a single united front." The chamber fell silent. This would mean a level of cooperation unprecedented in Council history, sharing military intelligence, pooling resources, and entrusting command to a united command structure. The implications were staggering. After a moment, Solari Intac of the Aquarian Collective broke the silence. "The Solari Dominion has been transparent in their offer of technology and support. They've kept us informed every step of the way. If we don't stand with them now, we may not have a second chance." Arvanix nodded, sensing the momentum shifting. "Very well," he declared. "We will form the Galactic Defense Coalition, with joint leadership between the Council and the Solari Dominion. May we all remember that this alliance is our last, best hope." Back on the Aegis of Sol, the bridge was alive with activity as Solari and Council forces began arriving in this sector. Massive capital ships, fighter squadrons, and specialized defense platforms converged, forming a protective ring around Solari Prime. The Galactic Defense Coalition's forces were unprecedented in scale, a veritable armada drawn from dozens of civilizations and centuries of technology. Eric watched the fleet amassing with a mix of hope and apprehension. Even as they prepared for the battle to come, he knew the Shade was a force of darkness that defied conventional strategies. He needed every advantage he could muster, and so he turned to an ancient source of Solari lore. In the Dominion's archives, there existed records of previous encounters with the Shade, written by the Solari's earliest leaders. These records described a being known as the Shard Mother, a terrifying entity that served as the central mind of the Shade. Destroying the Shard Mother, it was said, would cripple the Shade's ability to coordinate. Eric's mind raced as he formulated a plan. He would need to strike directly at the Shard Mother if he had any hope of ending this invasion at its source. He convened a meeting with key military advisors, including Captain Lyra Saren and Council fleet commanders. The display before them showed a simulation of the Shade's forces, a swarm of biomechanical ships linked by strange, pulsing energy tendrils that allowed them to communicate instantaneously. "Our objective is simple," Eric announced. "We cut off the head, and the body will follow. We will deploy a strike team to locate and destroy the Shard Mother. With its death, we'll have a fighting chance to scatter the Shade's forces." Captain Saren spoke up, her tone resolute. "But getting close to the Shard Mother will be nearly impossible with the Shade fleet surrounding it. We'll need a diversion." "Exactly," Eric replied, a faint smile playing at his lips. "While the main fleet engages the Shade, we'll lead an elite task force to penetrate their lines. It's a high-risk operation, but it's our best shot." The Council commanders exchanged tense glances. They understood the stakes. Failure wasn't an option. They would either stop the Shade here, or the galaxy would fall. The Coalition's fleet hung in orbit around Solari Prime, like a constellation of steel and fire, each vessel prepared for the battle of a lifetime. The Shade arrived shortly after, their ships appearing like rays slipping through the fabric of space itself. For the first time, the galaxy's inhabitants witnessed the Shade's terrible majesty. Sleek, biomechanical vessels that seemed to pulse with a dark, ethereal light, as if alive and ravenous. Eric's voice rang out over the intercom. "All Coalition forces, this is High Commander Solon. Today, we fight not just for ourselves, but for every world that calls this galaxy home. Hold the line, and remember, our strength is in our unity." With that, the battle erupted. Lasers, plasma bolts, and energy beams lit up the void as Coalition forces engaged the Shade in a chaotic but organized offensive. The Solari's advanced weaponry proved invaluable, with disruptor cannons that tore through Shade ships in explosive bursts of dark matter. Council vessels provided cover fire, coordinating with the Solari in a way that spoke to the desperate trust they had forged. But the Shade fought back with terrifying efficiency, their ships moving in eerie unison, reacting to Coalition tactics almost before they were executed. The Shard Mother's influence was unmistakable, guiding its forces with a cold intelligence that felt like the hand of death itself. As the main fleet fought to hold the line, Eric and his elite strike team maneuvered their way toward the heart of the Shade's formation, where the Shard Mother was said to reside. They moved in swift, calculated strikes, using the cover of the battle to weave through the Shade's defenses. "We're approaching the Shard Mother's position," reported Captain Saren, her voice tight with focus. "Energy readings are off the charts. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." Before them loomed the Shard Mother, a massive, dark, and pulsating construct that dwarfed the Coalition's ships. It resembled a colossal amalgamation of organic and synthetic matter, its surface writhing with tendrils that seemed to absorb energy from the space around it. Eric's eyes hardened as he took in the sight. "All units, focus your fire on the Shard Mother. We'll have to overload its defenses before we can even think about landing a killing blow." The strike team opened fire, their combined weapons hitting the Shard Mother in blinding bursts of energy. But the entity responded with a fury that defied understanding, unleashing waves of energy that shook their ships and disrupted their systems. It was as if the Shard Mother itself was alive, responding to their attack with a chilling intelligence. As the battle raged on, Eric felt a strange presence, an awareness, pressing against his mind. It was the Shard Mother, trying to probe his thoughts, to break his will. He clenched his fists, steeling himself. "I am not afraid of you," he whispered. But the Shard Mother's voice echoed in his mind, cold and mocking. You are nothing but dust in the cosmic wind, Eric Solon. Your defiance is meaningless. Gritting his teeth, Eric activated the ship's main cannon, diverting every last ounce of power to a final, devastating shot. "This galaxy is not yours to consume," he said, his voice filled with determination. "It belongs to us." With a blinding flash, the cannon fired, the beam piercing through the Shard Mother's defenses and striking its core. The creature let out a silent scream, the force of its agony reverberating through space. Its tendrils writhed and snapped, its form collapsing in on itself as its control over the Shade fleet began to wane. Back on the Coalition lines, the effect was immediate. The Shade ships faltered, their movements becoming disjointed and chaotic. The Coalition forces seized the opportunity, redoubling their efforts and cutting through the enemy fleet with renewed vigor. And as the Shard Mother's essence dissipated into the void, Eric Solon knew that they had won, not just a battle, but a victory for all of civilization. As the Shard Mother's final scream echoed through the void, the colossal, shadowy entity shuddered, tendrils breaking apart and dissolving into drifting stardust. The core of its vast, pulsating form began to collapse, imploding under its own energy. The Shade fleet, deprived of the Shard Mother's guiding intelligence, faltered and dispersed, their formation in disarray, as if they were puppets suddenly cut from their strings. On the Aegis of Sol, a heavy silence followed. Eric Solon and his team watched the screen as the Shade ships scattered, powerless and lost without the unifying will of their dark leader. Eric let out a slow breath, his gaze steely, as he addressed his bridge crew. "All Coalition forces, press the advantage. Wipe out any remaining Shade ships, but keep an eye out for survivors or signals. We need to understand everything we can about what's left of them." Captain Lyra Saren, standing beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder, the smallest glimmer of relief breaking her usual stern expression. "Hi, Commander, we did it." "Yes," Eric replied, nodding, though his mind was already racing ahead. "But this isn't over until we ensure that every remnant of the Shade is neutralized. And we need to figure out how they survived in the void for so long." Across Solari Prime, and all the planets represented in the Galactic Council, celebrations erupted as news of the Shard Mother's defeat spread. Citizens from every race and faction cheered, and in the great capital cities, people gathered in public spaces to watch the live broadcasts of the victory. Arvanix, standing at the Council Chamber's central platform, addressed the assembly and millions of viewers across the galaxy. "Today, the galaxy has witnessed the power of unity, of civilization standing together against a darkness that threatened us all. The Solari Dominion and the Galactic Council have shown what is possible when we put aside our differences for a common good. Let this alliance be the dawn of a new era for the galaxy." As he spoke, the leaders of various council factions exchanged glances. They had come close to ruin, and the horrors of the Shade's invasion were etched deeply into their minds. The sense of unity was real, but so was the lingering uncertainty. What other ancient threats might be lurking out there in the endless cosmos? Once the battle concluded, Eric gathered his command team for a final debrief. The ships that had not been destroyed by the Coalition forces were now scattered, remnants of the once terrifying Shade fleet. Most of these ships had been either disabled or captured, and Coalition scientists and Solari engineers were already beginning to examine the Shade's technology. Kale Dorian, his loyal lieutenant, studied a live feed from one of the captured Shade vessels, a dark, eerie craft with a design that seemed more organic than mechanical. He shook his head in disbelief. "These things, they're more like living organisms than ships. Every one of them was linked to the Shard Mother." Eric nodded, a troubled look crossing his face. "It's unsettling, but we need to understand them if we're going to prevent another invasion. See to it that a joint research team is established. I want both Solari and Council scientists working on this." "Understood, Commander." Kale replied. Captain Lyra Saren entered the room, her expression both hopeful and wary. The Council has requested a full debrief on our findings, and will want to know the full extent of what we've captured. Eric sighed, sensing a mix of relief and exhaustion from his crew. They'd fought not just a battle but the battle of their lives, and it was far from over. Tell the Council that I'll debrief them in person. It's time we address the future of this alliance in earnest. As the dust settled, the leaders of the newly formed Galactic Defense Coalition gathered for a summit on Solari Prime. The alliance between the Council and the Solari Dominion, once formed out of necessity, now held the potential to transform the galaxy in unforeseen ways. Representatives of the major factions were present, with Arvanix presiding over the gathering and Eric standing as the Solari Dominion's ambassador. The topic of discussion was the fate of the coalition. Should they maintain this alliance, formalizing it into a permanent organization, or return to their previous independent ways? I think it's clear that our galaxy will always be vulnerable if we stand alone, Arvanix stated. We cannot turn back from what we've accomplished together. I propose that we formalize the Galactic Defense Coalition into a standing force. We need shared intelligence, mutual defense, and the ability to mobilize together if threats like the Shade ever emerge again. Eric, sensing both enthusiasm and hesitation from the Council leaders, stepped forward. The Dominion has remained separate for centuries. We preferred our isolation, but we've learned that isolation cannot always protect us. We're prepared to contribute to a united coalition. Let's face it, the galaxy is vast, and none of us truly know what else is out there. Crixer, the Eric representative, who had once been the Dominion's staunchest critic, spoke next. I won't deny that we were reluctant to trust you, Solon, or your people. But today, we owe our survival to the Dominion. If we disband this coalition now, we will be repeating the mistakes of our past. With an overwhelming vote, the Council leaders agreed to formalize the Galactic Defense Coalition, creating a structure that would ensure mutual defense, shared resources, and even a council of advisors from every major faction and species. A new era was dawning, one where the galaxy would stand united in the face of unknown threats. Back on the Aegis of Sol, Eric watched as his people, both Solari and Council, mingled and collaborated, breaking down barriers that had once kept them apart. Despite his stoic demeanor, he felt pride in what they had accomplished together. As the Aegis prepared to leave Solari Prime for Solari space, Kale Doran approached him, looking out at the view of the Galactic Defense Coalition's united fleet. What do you think the future holds, Commander? Kale asked, a rare glint of wonder in his eyes. Eric considered his words carefully. We've ensured that the galaxy can face whatever comes next. But it will take more than alliances and ships to protect what we've built. We'll need understanding, trust, and a willingness to work together. And, perhaps, an acknowledgement of our shared responsibility to this galaxy. Kale nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. They had faced down the darkest threat the galaxy had ever known, and they had survived. Whatever the future held, they knew they would face it together. With that, the Aegis of Sol and the newly formed coalition's fleet turned their sights to the stars, prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. And so, the galaxy entered a new age, one born of fire, darkness, and, finally, unity. The legend of the Galactic Defense Coalition would live on, and the galaxy would never forget the day humanity's hidden colony returned, not as conquerors but as protectors, alongside countless other species who now stood as allies. Whatever awaited them in the cosmos, they would meet it together,